Are you working on your author career but struggling to get that first book published? Does the goal of being an author seem too lofty? Or thoughts of having multiple books and making a full-time living are as fantastical as living in Cinderella's castle? Welcome to Discovered Wordsmiths, a podcast where aspiring authors can be heard. Join Stephen Schneider as he finds and talks to authors you may not know, but authors that have gotten their foot on the author career path. Hear what they've done to get there and where they want to go now. Settle back. It's time for a bit of inspiration and advice. Come listen to today's Discovered Wordsmith.
All right, so let's move on to some author stuff. And like I said, I've got a very exciting topic I want to discuss with you because it affects me and what I'm trying to do, similar things. But before we talk about that, you've written several books. So what are some things that you've learned over that time that you're doing different than you did from the beginning?
Well, I've had such good practice, in terms of two different forms. One is um, uh, working collaboratively in the theater, where you're working together to create something. So that's an odd comparison, because here you are as a writer. For the most part, it's often a very, as you know, lonely. It's just you and that damn keyboard there, and the
Right,
glowing screen, unless you're
right,
writing
right.
with pen. And there are certain things that I learned in terms of collaboration, in terms of developing, in fiction especially, uh, uh, scene work and characters and so on. Um, but the other experience I had, of course, was developing this educational material. And even though that's a far, it's a long distance from this kind of fiction, uh, some of the disciplines are very important. As far as I can see, the thing that I learned the most had to do with making decisions, often intuitive decisions, about whether or not I was going to write an outline the way you would, say, for a film script, or whether I was just going to plunge into the material and see where I came out. And those are two very different approaches.
Yes,
Uh,
yes.
but I have learned over the years that in some cases it's better to just jump in and see what happens. And in other cases, it's better to lay it out. Or even if you don't start by laying it out, coming to a point in your writing where you say, oh man, I better stop a minute. I don't know where I am. I don't know where I've been. I don't know where I'm going.
Right. Yep. Yep. Charles, so when you're writing, are there any software or services that you like to use, particularly or different?
I'm a pretty simple guy when it comes to that. I write I write, well, it depends. If I'm writing a film script, which I have not been doing much of lately, then oh, what's the name of that film script program? There's a there's a script program that really is very beautifully set up.
Yeah, I've heard of it. I can't think of
Yeah.
the top of my head.
Uh, but for the most part, I just write in Microsoft Word.
Okay.
I just sit there and that's what uh, I've dealt with Microsoft Word. I've been writing on Microsoft Word. Now, I wish they'd stop putting bells and whistles on it, because I don't need them. I'm just, for the most part, I'm just writing. But yeah, that that's it for me, is kind of the simplest vehicle that will support my efforts, without
Got it.
getting into a lot of fooling around in codes and everything. Just give me something I can go left to right, left to right, left to right, and get it out there.
Right. Besides doing podcasts, what else are you doing to market your book?
Well, the social media stuff is very important. I've got it out um, to some reviewers through this publicist, who's it's always helpful to have some reviews that come from somewhat qualified people. I haven't hit the front page of the book section in the New York Times yet, but
Yes.
there are an awful lot of people out there doing very smart work, looking at books and stories, and you're doing part of that too. So for example, part of my publicity will be whatever we come up with here
Right.
on your show today. So
Right. So
that, and
let's.
then yeah.
I was going to say. So let's talk about some of that. So you've part of your career life has been working with and inspiring young writers. Tell us a little bit about how you got into that, and what exactly do you mean that you do to help inspire new writers?
Well, I think um, there's there are two situations that I'm used to. One is writers who are there because they just that's what they want to do. They want to learn how to write, and then of course you've got a captive audience sometimes. So you've whether they want to write or not is the real challenge, because I've literally had students, especially over the past few years when social media has taken over so completely, um, and they're like, "Look, I can get ideas across with my just crappy shorthand. Why are you teaching? Why are you telling me all these things that I need to know about style and why, you know?" And so the truth is that part of it is learn the craft. It's like being a musician. you know you can't, unless you play scales, unless you can play scales, there's not much you can do. You can you can you can get up and sit there and smash away at a guitar or a trumpet or some instrument you turn
Right.
into a torture machine, or you got to learn the craft.
Right.
So then the challenge becomes, well, how do you teach them the craft? Well, I think that the most critical uh, 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 thing that I try to get across very early on is writing has a purpose. It You have things in your life, you have experiences in your life. Let's find a way for you to write about your lives. Let's find a way for you to write about how life is impacting you, how life is affecting you. What who are you in the world? And finding ways that are, you don't ask somebody to write a gigantic novel right off the bat, but
Right.
you ask them, okay, let's, like, for example, I will start a class with two or three short exercises. One of them will be, okay, get ready. Either put your fingers on the keyboard or put your hand on a pen if you've got a piece of paper. Okay. Now, when I say go, you're going to start writing. And you're not going to stop writing until I say stop. And when I say you're not going to stop, I mean you're not going to think, you're not going to edit, you're not going to say, no, 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 that was all wrong. You're not going to do any of that. You're just going to write. And everybody goes, what the? So then, I say, okay, never mind the what the. Let's just do it. So they, that they let, hopefully I've defined it and gotten the idea across clearly enough, so they just let their crazy mind roll, their monkey chatter mind roll. So that's great, because then they're saying, okay, well, nobody was killed here. uh, I finished, look at what I wrote, and
Right.
I finished it, and nobody said you're wrong and that's terrible and you've got to die. So uh, then we move on, and I would say to them, okay, um, now we're going to write with some purpose. So now you've done this free writing. Here's an assignment for you. You are going to go with a friend to a museum, an art museum, and you are going to look at the latest exhibit of, say, Van Gogh paintings or whatever's there. So you and your friend are going to go, but here's the deal. Your friend is blind. So it's your job to describe this painting to your friend. So then they get 15 minutes or something and I put a painting up on a wall, up on the
I like that.
PowerPoint, shoot it up there. A painting, something crazy. I want, some, you can use almost any painting and say, okay, now remember, you are now going to tell your blind friend what this painting is about. So then they have a purpose. So then they see, oh, look what's falling into place here. I'm trying to tell what the colors are, what the background is, what the objects or the characters or the animals or whatever are doing, uh, and what kind of impression it's giving me as I look
Right.
at it.
Right. I like that exercise. Just so you know, I may steal that. On my
Sure,
website, I've got
absolutely,
exercises that I
yeah,
call imagination inspiration, and I might put that one up and steal that. So let me ask, you said you worked for a nonprofit that created materials and stuff. What type of materials were you creating? And I assume these would be for schools. Oh,
yes,
you know what? A comment first. I do like what you were talking about, because one of the things I see is, especially in schools, and not blaming them and not all schools, but they talk about, we're going to teach the kids writing, but they focus on only the craft and the sentence structure and proper use. And there's a whole other side to writing, that you have to get the story out. You have to be creative,
right.
regardless of punctuation, regardless of spelling. That's the part that I think gets missed in schools often.
Often, I think I agree with you, and the trick really is to say, okay, let's have, so now you've had some fun. Usually, you know on, say, this particular exercise I told you about the painting, uh, students will say, "Hey, that was fun, man. It was great." And they're proud to read them, and some of them are
Right.
funny, and some of them are, quite beautiful, and so on. And they got results. But then, of course, that's the time when you say, "Okay, now let's see how you said this, and is there any way that you could say it in a?" I tend to work towards simplicity, in terms of, I'm not going to teach you grammar, but I'm going to teach you to write straightforwardly. And I'm also going to teach you, and this I use, I'd be glad to send this to you. It's, uh, uh, I, I say often to my upper level classes, like, these are university students in their second or third year, fourth year. I say, okay, now you're going to be your own editor.
That's rough.
So rather than having some teacher that you're writing for, you are going to be your own editor. And then I break that down into three different jobs that an editor has. And in those different jobs, you've got conceptual organizational editing, right? The big sort of big picture or organizing. Then you have an editor who's looking at what's called line editing, which is syntax and and style and clarity. And then all the way down at the bottom is you are your own copy editor. And so you do this with material that they've drafted, right? So you say, okay, now we're going to look at this from the overall editor's point of view. Now we're going to look at it from the line editors. Could you have said this more simply, this line? Why, you've got a run-on sentence here. What's a run-on sentence? Why does it detract from the clarity of what you're trying to say? How can
Right.
we
Yeah.
change that? These kinds of
Nice. I
things.
like
So
that.
I try to bring it, sort of drag it along beneath the purpose of, say, a good writing prompt, where they get
Yes.
something on the paper.
And I
And
like that
then,
because that's my thinking too. Because the
yeah,
kids get a lot of craft and grammar and spelling. They don't need that. They get that. But the problem is that becomes the focus of the writing. So I've seen a lot of adults that they start writing and you read it and you're like, okay, well, where's the story? You've got a rambling narrative here that's no interesting story, that's no conflict, that's no real protagonist or antagonist. There's
right.
nothing that makes it a story.
Yeah,
And I can care less what the grammar is if I'm not interested in the story. And I
that's
think kids
right.
need that.
And then once you get a story there, then you can say, well, how can we really make this work so it's moving beautifully?
Yes.
That's then
And that's important. You
then
can't,
they have a framework, a context in which
yes. Yeah.
to sort of
And
say
and
how
they've
that.
got experience.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh, be, because I see again trying to teach adults or kids something before they have experience in that. This was something I learned clear back in Boy Scouts, that you have them do something and see what they do know and get the experience. So when you're talking about it and teaching it, they get it better because they're like, oh, if I want to light a fire, I need to build it this way and use this material and that.
yes,
Now that makes sense. That's why my fire didn't light.
yeah,
And the same with stories. It's very difficult to teach somebody how to write a short story if they've never written a short story. So with kids, they're more open. Just get them out there, write. And now we
yes.
could talk about editing, like you said.
Right, and it goes all the way back to that very first exercise, which is don't stop, because when you stop, that's you thinking about what you're writing about. I don't want
Yes.
nobody is. I say this often in my classes. Nobody will be killed. You're in a safe place here.
Right, right.
You know,
So
nobody's.
when you worked for the nonprofit, what were some of the materials you were creating to assist in this?
This stuff was very specific supplemental material. In other words, it wasn't huge textbooks, but it was social studies and law related education, which sounds dry as hell. But social studies, so U.S. and world, tackling U.S. and world history, depending on what grade. The most state public school systems have a set of standards where if you're teaching American history, you kind of got to hit in the seventh grade, you got to hit these numbers, and this is what we're. So you're keeping in mind that, but this material was a lot of it was um, short, almost like news articles on American history or world history, current events, in which not only are you writing, this is why it was such a good exercise as a writer, but you are also creating a basis for students to have a civil conversation about a topic, so uh, do video games create violence? I mean, so first of all, you want to write something, but you want to write something that has to do with that topic and gives both sides of the idea, and then channels its way down to a procedure in which you get them to explore what they've just read.
Right.
So it's very challenging writing, because even though it's even harder because you've got very limited space. You have to really be careful what vocabularies you're using, and of course it has to be in some way balanced. It has to in some way say, on one hand we have this this point of view about this issue. On the other hand, we have that point of view about that issue. So
Right.
uh, there's a lot of that, and then uh, it just being the clarity, the exercise in clarity was, and it can get very complex. I mean, law-related education is about constitutional law and the tension between what the Constitution says and what the world is all about, which we've seen a lot of lately.
Right.
So,
Right.
so that was the other kind of writing, was had to do with taking up issues. For example, they would be now taking up issues about gun control, or women's right to choose,
Right.
reproductive freedom, so on.
Yeah, the episode that I just am putting live this week had to do with someone who wrote, it's a fiction story, but in the first chapter, her protagonist has an abortion, and she wrote this like 2 years ago, and it just so happens she's releasing it now, and it's very timely. So we had a good talk about that. The history thing we talked about earlier. You learn from fiction if it's written right and good and fits and all that. Uh,
Yeah,
you mentioned you mentioned video games, which I found interesting too, because one of the things I'm working on is doing a workshop for kids on writing for video games, writing story and writing narrative for video games, because we're getting more
yeah,
of that. It's getting bigger, and it's a form of entertainment that needs good story writing. It's
yes,
not
it does.
your typical beginning, middle, end. It doesn't follow the same arc. So it's an interesting new way for kids to write that could be of interest to them. Plus, it could lead some to programming or other skills. And video games are huge in our country right now.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think you I think that's very right. And what the other dimension to video games, in terms of story, is that you're not necessarily dealing with a linear story. In
Right.
other words, you have options in terms of developing video games, where you could be going you could be hitting a crossroads, and a whole other story would branch out. So there's a
Right.
lot of, there's just this tremendous. Now sometimes all of those possibilities can drive you crazy, but certainly video games is great. And I feel like a lot of what we're seeing on coming up on Netflix and some of these other channels has to do with kind of stories that really can't be told in a simple beginning, middle, and end, but a different
Right.
thing.
Yeah. So, Charles, do you know or have or recommend or something for teachers or parents or even just kids, any materials that are out there, some books or training courses or anything else like that, that they want to get into writing, they just don't know where to start?
Um, for kids, um, it's uh, I've had. Let's see if I've got all of them up here. I've got a million of them. Um, you know, uh, this one, dry though it may be, um, this is kind of the beginning and end of everything in
Yeah.
terms of style. As it says, it's about style. It's not about story. Um, I also used in my class for a long time. Um, well, this is a big thing, and I wouldn't say it's something for the students to necessarily know about. But have you come across the writer's journey?
I've got that exact copy. I mean, I've got that same cover, and yeah, I've
Sure.
got that one too.
As well, you should. You know, because it goes to the heart of what makes up story in terms of our collective consciousness, our collected, this is basically Joseph Campbell, the sort of the mythological historian. All of his work kind of boiled down into a storytelling. Uh,
Yes.
the,
And
it's
one of the other things I do is encourage teachers, parents, kids to write fan fiction because it's a world they know. They don't have to think about the world and the world building and so much and the
true.
characters. It's a good way
Yeah,
to get started writing. And again, once you have that experience of writing, you've got some writing under your belt, the grammar and other stuff makes a lot more sense and is
sure.
easier. And I think too many schools and teachers, and it's not their fault. They have a curriculum, they have to do Common Core and all that jazz. But
Yeah.
I think to really encourage good writers, and we start them early in school, fan fiction is a great way to do it.
Yeah, no, that once again, that's kind of the part of the theme you and I have been talking about here is get some stuff on the page and then we'll look at it. Let's
Right,
not freak out about, oh, that's wrong. Oh, that's wrong. Let's get something down there and have a
right.
good time with that and then see what, you know, what we can do to make it stronger, clearer, more impactful, all the good stuff that comes with style,
Yeah, absolutely.
style
All right,
development.
so Charles, we've had a great discussion, and you're going to read a chapter from your book here in a moment. But
Okay.
before we do that, do you have any last minute advice for new authors or young authors?
Um, I think again, I don't want to qualify it too much. For basically, right, my fundamental suggestion for new authors and young authors is write about what's important to you. And it can seem trivial to somebody else. It doesn't matter. If you can convince us that it's important to you, then you've told us, you've succeeded. uh,
Yeah,
Write about the things in your life that are important, that impact your life, the things that you feel either are unjust and need changing, or things that you love about your life, uh, and write about them as fully and clearly as you can. Even if it's the time you went swimming with some friends and you went over a waterfall, or I mean, who knows what the you know uh, and write from there first, and then from there you start looking at what other people might think is important and so on. But first, you, you
got it. Great.
comes
Well,
from
Charles, great. I appreciate that. Good advice. Thanks for chatting with me today. We've had a great discussion about your book and writing in general.
absolutely, yeah.
Hi, if you enjoyed this episode of Discovered Wordsmiths, please support the author. Go to their website, go to Amazon, look them up, get the book. And if you click on the link that I have in the show notes, you'll also help support the podcast so I can keep the hosting and all the software I use and keep it running to help more authors. When I am recording this, we've got over 100 episodes, lots of authors. Go to the website, discoveredwordsmiths.com. Check it out. There's a lot of great authors, probably in some genre that you love. See what they have. Check out their books. That's what the point of the podcast is for. So people can discover new authors, find some new books they love, support the authors so they can continue writing. So please support them. And if you do like the podcast, if you've been thinking of podcasting or you're a writer, I've got some links also at the website. Click on those if you're interested in any of the software or services that I talk about. Everything that I have there is something I use, so I've got an affiliate link. Again, it's a little bit, if everyone clicked on those, if they were going to get it anyway, it helps keep the podcast going. So let's all help each other out and discover more authors to read.
Thank you for listening to Discovered Wordsmiths. Come back next week and listen to another author discuss the road they've traveled, and maybe, sometime in the near future, it might be you.